welcome to Season 1, Episode 5 of Silo, aka the Janitor's Boy. We're gonna dispense with the usual intro because y'all know the drill by now. As always though, a quick thanks and shout out to the channel patrons. Check the link if that sounds like something you're interested in, and you can check out the growing Discord here where you can meet fans of the shows that I cover on the channel. Alright, that's it. Fastest intro ever. Let's dive. So we kick things off with Jules going over the files that Holston stashed away for her, and we see George Wilkins' sheet, but there's also a file on Gloria, a person of interest during the investigation from the earlier episodes because of her connection to Rachel's discovery and subsequent exit from the silo. The files clue us into a few other things though. There's a mention of a relic in the interrogation record for George. We see that they talked about the watch, and he also claims that he is alone, perhaps because he's protecting Juliette like he said he intended to. While she's reading this, she's interrupted by a porter with a message, and it's signed by Sims, and it confirms to the audience that Marnes did not survive last night's ambush by the man in black. Next, we are whisked away to the crime scene. It's in this scene that we're finally introduced to the Billings character, the would-be sheriff, if not for Holston's request to place Juliette in that spot. Sims tells Juliette that Billings is her new deputy sheriff, and that's sus given that we know that Judicial wants to push Juliette out of her position and insert one of their own people. We're supposed to be suspicious right off the bat. I mean, this really should be her decision to make. Part-time IT manager, mayor, and small forward for the Houston Rockets. Bernard pops in to do what he always does, and that's put damage control and PR spin at the top of the list of priorities. They only care about how things look and how that will affect their ability to control the people in the silo. Notice the weird way that Sims looks at Billings when he's exiting, but doesn't say anything at the end of the shot. It's like he's reminding him that there's something important expected of him, like we're on the same page, right? You gonna do the thing I told you to do? That's the look he's giving him right there. Juliette asks for some privacy so that she can search Marnes for clues. She finds a list of names with people with records, criminal records. This must be the list that Marnes asked for to begin searching for Mayor John's killer. On this list, there's a name circled, Doris Kennedy. Juliette and Sims are with the interim mayor discussing the plans on how to deal with the new problem, and Juliette suggests burying them together, Mayor Johns and Marnes. I think we're meant to think that she says this because she knows Marnes was in love with Mayor Johns, even though the reason she gives Bernard is meant to look practical and efficient. Bernard bites because he thinks it's a great story to tell the people that they were lovers, as a way of distracting them from the truth. Everything is spin with this guy. It's interesting to see how these powerful people, Juliette included, conspire behind closed doors to determine what truth works best for their needs. It's really just about control. This is what really hooked me about this show as someone who is fascinated by the power of stories in society. The plot here is all about that. Bernard doubles down on the idea by choosing to run a competition, a race to the top, in honor of the former mayor. More distraction to divert attention away from things. Everything is a calculation, but notice how the greatest perceived threat is transparency. Moving on to the burial ceremony, we're in this sort of apple grove and we watch as the bodies are laid to rest. Another apple reference as a metaphor for life and death, perhaps? Interesting. Like a true engineer, Bernard gives the worst speech ever as he starts doing the math around John's time in office, and it's obviously painful, even for Sims. Still, chuckles were had. Juliette gives a good speech. It was inspiring and showed some humility, which seems to have made a positive impression with a few people, i.e. Salty Sandy. Speaking of Salty Sandy, she has a closed-door conversation with Juliette in which she tells Juliette that, I don't like you, but we need to get along for both of our benefit. The two women don't exactly make peace, but they come to a sort of mutual respect, game-recognized game, if you will. Sandy lets Juliette know she knows what's going on, and that if Juliette expects things to run smoothly, then she'd better help find Marnes' killer as well. Little extra credit. Sandy warns Juliette that Judge Meadows only cares about maintaining order, not getting the truth. So Juliette will need to color outside the lines a bit if she wants to get to the bottom of this case. So again, we're getting a clearer outline of how power works in the silo, and it's not pretty. This scene made me kind of like Sandy actually, or at least respect her. She's someone you want on your side. Not a super important scene other than for one fact, the scene where Jules and Billings are doing the detective thing and they run across a suspect. The man's hands are jittery as the camera makes sure we notice this. It's called the syndrome, and it's going to matter soon, so keep this one in the mental notes. Juliette manages to lose Billings so she can do a solo investigation into the Doris Kennedy situation. This is that person from Marnes' list whom we were told is deceased, but her husband is still alive. He's the guy that broke Marnes' nose in earlier episodes. Juliette manages to jimmy the lock to the apartment. This apartment is the former residence of the Kennedys, but according to Judicial, they still live there, or at least Judicial still thinks they live there. So a search of the place turns up a tin of rat poison. Dun dun dun. That drawing of John's that Marnes had on his wall. Remember that from episode 4? Now normally this would look like Kennedy was implicated, but of course he's no longer at this address. They messed up. But Juliette also remembers the drawing. So she's got to be thinking, why in the world would the killer take the drawing and put it with the poison? Unless it's a frame-up. Juliette does the wise thing and locates Patrick Kennedy and stashes him somewhere safe in anticipation of Judicial's next move. Spice levels intensifying. The following scene is important. Billing is in his office with, wouldn't you know it, a mysterious goon in black. This might be the fastest mystery we've ever solved on the Silo so far. We also get to see what kind of person Billings is in this scene, and I'd say he gives off that studious FBI new hire vibe, but in no way does he give off any hints of a sinister agenda. He seems like a good dude, so what's the deal? Sims introduces the goon as Doug Trumbull. He's Judicial, and it appears that he's being mentored by Sims personally. They call it shadowing. So Billings is here because he wants to know what Judicial knows about the murders, because he knows that they get the best information. The interesting thing though is that he takes this information back to Juliette. Further proof that he might be okay. The key thing to take away here is how Billings makes it known that Judicial can fudge the lines to get their way, and that Judicial is incredibly powerful and has long reach within the Silo. Billings reveals that he is a by-the-book kind of guy and he's not a fan of rule bending. I think this is essential to his identity. He's a true believer in the Pact and what it stands for, and in the Silo, and he's still kind of an innocent. Not naive, but innocent. Anyway, he claims to have been given a lead on the investigation and that they're looking for a Patrick Kennedy as their fall guy. Good thing she stashed him away. This is an obvious red herring meant to draw Juliette off the trail and get her canned and replaced, and she knows this. You can't trust Judicial, ever. She has to beat Judicial to Patrick's old place to confirm and expose Judicial's devious plan. But guess who shows up to find Patrick? Trumbull. What follows is a tense but fun action sequence, like something out of a Bond film. Trumbull is being chased by Juliette in the middle of the race to the top competition, which is literally just a bunch of people running to the top of the Silo. After a few close shaves, Trumbull grabs Jules and throws her over the railing, but she manages to barely survive the ordeal, if not for some citizens coming to her rescue. These were people that were actually running in the race. Trumbull escapes, of course, and next we see him skulking in some dark corner of the Silo until he comes to a door labeled Janitorial. Right before he knocks, Sims pops out and asks him how he knew about this place. We don't get to see inside, but this is obviously not where they're keeping the brooms and the mops. Okay, so Sims, what can we say about this guy? This meeting proves that he had something to do with John's death, and he might also be connected to George too. He's doing dirt behind the scenes, and Trumbull is acting as his right hand. The two men walk out onto the bridge that connects to the staircase, which immediately got my attention as an ominous setup. So Sims starts waxing poetic, telling us about his dad, and how he was a janitor, but not really a janitor. I'm not going to retell it here, but the gist and moral of the story is that there is always more than one way to solve a problem, but more importantly, that real power moves in the silence. We also get the sense that he believes he is doing the right thing, even though his actions are reprehensible. His motives are pure. It's all about the Silo for him. Then, of course, he pushes Trumbull off the rail and casually walks away. Bygones. Trumbull became a liability. Sims has to keep his secrets for the good of the Silo, or at least that's what he believes. Note, enter Judge Meadows. So in this scene, this character that we keep hearing about and haven't seen until now finally appears. Juliette relays the details of her case to Meadows, and she immediately comes off as uninterested in finding the truth and much more interested in just moving on, just like Sandy said she would. Note too that Trumbull had a note planted on him to push the lie that he offed himself, rather than getting a little help from Mr. Sims. Now we can already tell that Meadows and Sims are in cahoots by the looks that they give each other when Juliette is talking about investigating this case further, and she basically orders Juliette to leave it be. Curious and suspicious at best. Her reaction gives us every reason to believe that shenanigans are afoot, and even the head of Judicial is somehow involved in this conspiracy. Sandy announces her resignation or transfer, depending on how you want to read it, but Juliette tries to convince her to stick around, being the valuable ally that she is. Sandy says she's done with the up top and the constant feeling of being surveilled. Huge hint right there. Even Sandy knows she's being watched, but she doesn't know how she's being watched. There is a moment where Sandy reminds Juliette that she still doesn't like her, but you can see the subtle indication of a grin or a smile as she says it. Stop lying, Sandy, you know you like Jules, just admit it. A slightly sauced up Bernard meets up with Jules to announce that the Silo needs a Forgiveness Day, another event meant to distract the people but also give them a release from the stressful events of the past few days in the Silo. He also tells Jules that he believes in her and that she's got his back during his time in office. A fig leaf extended by Bernard. That's weird. Okay, escape. You remember Lucas, of course. We finally find out what he's been up to sitting in the cafeteria every night until closing. Turns out he's doing a little stellar cartography, and he doesn't even know it. The people of the silo are completely ignorant of the natural world, so much so that they don't know that those lights in the sky are stars, or even what a star is for that matter. Lucas notices the movements and patterns, and he's been recording it. More on him later. So Juliette heads down to the lowers to get some of her stuff and do some proper goodbyes. She visits Walker to catch up for a bit. It turns out the story of her close encounter with Trumbull has made its way all the way down to the lowers, and a lot of people down there are concerned for her. They get into a discussion about the camera and the lenses, which leads to another conversation about the pact and how Walker has two big questions about the pact that she wants answers for. One, why is it that they aren't allowed to make mechanical systems to traverse the silo faster? Two, why is magnification strength limited? She mentions that Jules' mom had an illegal magnifying glass that was destroyed by Judicial, which is interesting because it indicates that Hannah was a bit of a rebel herself. Walker wants Jules to quit. She's worried she might be the next person in the body bag, but Juliette won't relent. She's determined to find out what happened to George. Juliette shares with Walker that Bernard trusts her now, and she has to make these moves while the opportunity presents itself. In the final scenes, Jules is back in the pit below the silo looking for something. She produces the Pez dispenser again. As a reminder, we still don't know what this is for, especially this little attachment on it. But whatever this is, it's gotta be important. I guess we're gonna have to wait and find out. Let me know in the comments how you guys feel about Sandy. I don't know what it is, but I started to really like her at the end, and I was actually sad that she was moving or transferring. I'm actually hoping that we see more of her later on. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you already know what to do. Be good to yourself, be good to others, and until next time, peace.